All right, test, test, test. Look at that, it is working well enough anyway. Let's do a quick adjustment. See how that goes. Great. We're back again doing another. And yes, if you're watching, I do have Droid Cam app in my face, but I wanted higher quality video and bluntly, we are experimenting with some stuff. So, boom. There it is. Actually, let me fix one more thing on my camera if I can. Let's see. Let's see how that looks. Pretty good, actually. We'll go a little bit more angled. And then I was experimenting with lighting. Yeah, that's actually good. Good stuff. So we are back again with more tier list video. So for this video, as you can see, we are looking at controversial coping methods. If you have ever experienced a rough day with your mental health or in the life you live, you've probably wanted to cope with it a little bit. And so we are going to look at some of these. So I put together about 24 different methods of ways that people can cope with things. Now, what we're going to look at is specifically controversial ones because there's some that are like, I think, obviously not healthy for people. And then there are others that are obviously healthy for at least the average person. So I thought we'd focus on controversial. You can see the list we have in advance here. And we have from S to F. So we will begin. We'll jump in with a simple one, venting. So just as a way for you to have an idea of how I'm going to approach this, S tier to me is going to be this is always helpful, or at least it's really good. F tier is something that I'm going to put in the classification of really never helpful. And some of this is arbitrary. There's maybe too many items, but we'll see. So venting. All right, venting, and I should specify for those new, I am a licensed mental health clinician in Kansas and Missouri. I do professional business coaching as well, helping people find what they really want to be doing with their life and working on identity formation. And one of the pieces that comes up a lot with the work that I particularly focus on is how we handle the day-to-day understanding when it comes to our sense of self. And a lot of people that I work with are dealing with a moment of feeling lost or undecided on something. And what can come with that is depression and anxiety. And sometimes when we stack too many days or moments of just, I don't know what I want to do, we just kind of tend to cope. And sometimes that coping can lead to unhealthy behaviors or circling back to behaviors that maybe aren't even unhealthy, but they don't serve us anymore, but we're familiar with them. And they're not actually connected with the new life, the new person we're trying to build. So I'll also say that while these are professional opinions in here, um, any of my input does not particularly replace therapy, really in any way, I should specify. And all of these should just be ways to understand one therapist's perspective on how to handle scenarios and what could or could not be useful. So, venting. I will start out by saying that with venting, I do believe that there is an element of a how would you say it? Question mark regarding what we mean by that. So I'm going to provide the definition of venting is just letting out information with no goal whatsoever. Now, I do think being able to unload your emotions is helpful. In therapy, that's helpful. A close group of friends with the right people, it's helpful. So there's going to be a caveat where if we're going into this with the intent of coping, where we're saying, I want to feel better, so I'm doing this. I do think venting has its place. It can be problematic. So it's not going to go up here in any of these three. But I would put it in C. If it becomes a constant habit, it's not helpful. And if it leads to nothing, it's not helpful. So if you have a venting session and you feel better afterwards, and you can then use that to move forward, that's helpful. That last piece is key because if you just unload information but don't end that interaction with any type of forward movement whatsoever, like, okay, what do we do with this now? Or we let it all out? What do I collect? What's actually true about what's going on versus just random emotion? So I'm going to put it in C because I think if it's responded to well and it's done with intentionality, it's going to be really useful. If it's not, it can actually be harmful, especially if it gets into a pattern, it can be damaging. Next up, we'll do dark humor. I'm gonna put dark humor probably in B. I might move it. It definitely has its place. It's not dead bottom. I don't think it's also always helpful. So dark humor, if you are in a field of work or if you're living a life that has dark moments, so my field is a therapist, you hear a lot of awful things and and typically that's people telling stories of what's happened to them. Different therapists hear different stories. I worked in a domestic violence shelter for a while, and that you hear very different stories there than you would if you were just working in, well, even right now, what I do with private practice. You have certain demographics that come in talk about certain things. If you're working in crisis outreach, it's going to look different. If you're going into war zones, if you're doing I know people who've gone to do mental health work in the Middle East with all the conflicts going on right now. You will hear different stories. So we often will cope with mental processing at the level of the experience. So if you're not experiencing huge events, you're not processing usually at a huge level. So where dark humor can be helpful, where therapists will use it, nurses use it as well, um, is to just joke about horrific things. Cops do it. Now, I am going to put this in B because I think this can be cathartic, but it can also lean into potentially being harmful towards the populations you work with. So you want to make sure you're not coping with dark humor that's directed at insulting of people. We'll put it that way. And so where this starts to, and actually, I'm going to put it in. This is hard because you don't want to get stuck in negative thought patterns. So if you're having a rough go of it and you're making a hard joke or a dark joke just to maybe get through a moment, that can be useful. But if you're shrugging off the real pain of the experience, that's where this starts to get bad and unhealthy. So I'm actually going to put it as probably a little less helpful than venting. This is subjective, though. And this is why we're doing the controversial one. Some of these are going to be hard to place. But dark humor is subjective, and it really depends on how healthy you already are and where you will lead that. So if you're already in a bad mental place and now you're using dark humor to just cope with life, that's different than a rough day or a tough moment. So a lot of subjectivity there. All right, we'll go into pornography. Let's cut out a little bit. So this is going to be the first one that I'm going to put right here and never helpful. So, and when I put something in that category, what I would say is that there's never really, from my understanding, a clinical benefit to doing this at any moment. Now, I know a lot of people say they can use pornography in moderation. Even know that there are couples who integrate it into their relationship or their allowed to use it in certain contexts. And of course, the people working in that industry, a lot of them are married to people. And my reasoning is I just haven't seen personally a lot of data that supports using this as an approach. There's also an element of vicarious enjoyment, and this is true for social media use, where you want to be careful as well of just watching people have a good time when you're not feeling well, because it can really disconnect you from yourself. There's also, I think, a weird thing that can happen when you're watching people engage in intimate behavior online. It's almost like watching through a window to something private. And especially if you're wanting mental satisfaction or you're wishing you can be in this place instead, it really disconnects you from your life in a way that takes some control away from you and your autonomy by watching other people do things. And as we know, it can set really unhealthy standards and expectations for intimacy and sex and joyful life when it comes to physicality in people's bodies. And it's, damaging to pretty much everyone, but you see it especially damaging with men and young men in particular. And there does seem to be a tendency, as this is used, typically not in moderation, with people wanting to escalate and increase the amount that they use, like a drug. Um, and with pornography, that does unfortunately start to lead into categories that can border into, I shouldn't say border, they can go full on into illegal content. And there's also, when you just talk about the safety of other people with how you cope, this industry has a big problem with not verifying age of people on film and not verifying consent. And so it's just really dangerous as a world to get into. And it just doesn't really help. Um, it's not a generally safe way to cope. In terms of your own personal safety at home, sure. But coping with it can put other people at risk, and it doesn't do a lot of good for your brain and how you view. So, uh, again, this is a controversial list. I do think some people might push back on that one, but I believe pretty strongly in that idea that this is probably not a good route to go when you're coping. All right, taking a mental health day. Okay, so this is one that can be abused and used very well. So I'm gonna actually put it in A. I do think our society could benefit from people feeling encouraged to take time to care for themselves and to know that work is not life. Like, you do not have to give everything you have to work. And a mental health day could also be, if you're a stay-at-home mom and you need someone else to step in for the day. These are appropriate. Um, certain people have a very low bar for this, so this can be used in an unhealthy way. But I think in moderation it can be used well. That's why we language it as taking a mental health day versus just having a habit of it. Here's how I would encourage people to use this coping method in a really healthy way. And this is something you can say with most of the coping methods we talk about here, but I'll use this as the primary first example, is doing this through wise counsel. Okay? So you might just wake up and need it, or it might build into it. But ideally, and I know not everyone has this, but having a good relationship with a boss or a manager, if possible, or coworkers, and bringing it up of, hey, this is what my life is looking like right now, and I feel like I might just need a day. And if they can hear you and empathize and say, I think that's wise, that can be a really good sign that you need it. Talking with close, trusted friends, and they hear that you're overwhelmed and they recommend, hey, maybe you just need to take a day off. This is why, and this won't show up on this list, but it's a really big deal, is doing everything you can to build your social support. This is hard, it takes time. Some people lean towards living a solo life and they say, I don't need a community of people. I'd rather just stay in my little tight knit corridor. Generally, I don't think that's healthy. You can live a healthy-ish life that way, but a bigger community is usually helpful when they're healthy. That's the caveat. So when you have people around you suggesting this or saying it could be helpful or agreeing with you, then this becomes really, really helpful. reason it's not an S tier is because you can't do it all the time, and it won't be helpful all the time, and sometimes people take a mental health day and they use it really poorly. This is where having people involved in your life can be astronomically helpful, is they can maybe give some input as to how to use it well. So, it's my recommendation there. We're gonna go next to cutting off parents. So this is a very hot button topic. So we'll do it a little bit today, but some things are called like TikTok trending or social media trending. And this is a current trend right now to cut off contact with your parents. Because it's a trend, I'm actually going to put it in D or C. I don't know yet. Here's where this comes down to. Every person would benefit from a healthy relationship with their parents. So as you're growing up, you need a healthy parent figure, parenting couple, a set of adults that take care of you and guide you well in life. We all need this. When you talk to people who say, I don't want a good relationship with my parents, usually what they're saying is, what my parents have shown me about who they are makes me not want a relationship with them. But if you break that question down, you can typically still get to an answer of, yeah, if they were healthy and if I could have a good and healthy relationship with them and none of the trauma or problems were there, that would be ideal. Everyone needs parents. And so I really believe strongly that cutting them off should be like a knife to the heart. It should be a hard decision to do, not a flippant one. And we should do everything we can to give them every chance possible to stay connected. So many people just say, well, they messed up or they gave me trauma. And there's a whole other topic of we do probably have a tendency, and this is more layman speak, and therapists as well do this, but to over create trauma. So we don't have enough clear definitions oftentimes on what trauma is. Sometimes people just had a bad day and they say it's traumatizing, or they had a bad experience in school, or they got grounded and they said they were traumatized. Every case is different, and we got to be careful with what we say is trauma, and we need to be careful cutting off parents. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't ever cut them off. The reason it's in D tier is because I would actually not consider this coping. I would consider this a very intentional decision about how to move forward in life. So typically, if you're cutting off parents as a way to cope, I'm going to argue that it's often not healthy. But if you're cutting them off because you've spent a lot of time in therapy and talking with trusted people, and we've hit a point where it's like, yeah, they're just not doing any service in your life, and they're actually hurting you to stay around. So typically, this is a decision that's made through a lot of time, and then at that point, it's no longer coping. So, um, and there can be healthy moments of saying, "Hey, I need some space." I'm not quite cutting off. So, and like with any of this, I might caveat too much. People are welcome to push back and give thoughts. It's the fun of a discussion. Okay, comfort eating. Comfort eating. I'm gonna put this probably in high C. It's more of it affects your body. Venting and dark humor can get your brain going in directions where your outlook on life can change. Whereas eating, the way we eat does affect our brain and can affect things like depression, anxiety, and how we feel and our emotions. But it's not a thought pattern. So this can be super unhealthy. It doesn't always have to be. Generally speaking, eating as a way of coping is not a good place to be. It's a way of taking control over something when life feels out of control. So usually that's a sign that you feel things are out of control. But I'll just put it in low B. This can stack up and be problematic, but I think at times it's not horribly dangerous. Does depend on what that looks like if you're just 5,000 calories on a fast food binger versus you're having a bowl of ice cream when you weren't planning to, you know? So, it can get out of hand like most of these things, but, um, I don't know that it's as horrible on your mental health as the others, which is where the lane I'm gonna try to stay in. Okay, we'll go casual sex. Alright. I can see this one creating some pushback as well, but we're going in F for this, never useful. So, um, a couple reasons. One, it can be it's super unsafe, and I want you to think for a second, whether you've partaken in this, been tempted to, or you're just thinking about it. If you're having a rough day and you wanna cope by doing this, so you that probably means you're not connecting in a loving way to the person. You're probably not actually having good intimacy with the person, right? Because you're stressed and you wanna cope. That's not particularly a loving way to engage in deep intimacy with someone, and you're likely going to be going on a route with, hooking up with someone you might not know, um, whether it's through an app or going out on the street, whatever you do. You're probably connecting with someone that you're not close to, that you don't know, uh, their sexual history, and if they're carrying anything that's unsafe or unhealthy, if they themselves are potentially unsafe or unhealthy. Um, you set yourself up for more physical risk by doing this. And it's a whole other conversation if you're already in a relationship with someone and you're coping with someone else. That's super F tier at this point. But even if it's with someone that you're close to or you're part of the sexual communities that are more open to this, I just don't genuinely think this is a useful way to connect your brain chemistry and your physical chemistry with another person as a way to cope. So, um, generally speaking, things that are meant for close love and intimacy are not usually very healthy to engage in as a way to cope with life. Usually, the emotional and vulnerable depth just won't actually be present. So, yeah. Oh, here's a fun one. Pray it away. Okay. Okay. So the two ways that I think people will hear this, one is we've heard it with the LGBTQ community, right? Like pray the gay away. So you have a sinful behavior, and you just pray it away. The positive way can be, hey, life is hard, so we're gonna pray. Uh, and that's healthy, that mindfulness, that prayerful approach. The language in here, though, is prayed away. So implying that if you have some sort of stressor that you are needing to cope with, that the way that you cope is to pray for it to go away. I'm actually going to put it in high D, and I'll tell you what. If your mindset is, I'm in a struggling place, so my approach right now to cope with this is I'm going to just release it to a higher power. That can be very healthy. And that would be an S tier level healthy. Okay. Now, where this can be tough is if you are in a high stress state and your belief is that if I just do this, things will be okay. That's, you know, what happens then if it doesn't work? Right? Is it now because whatever spiritual approach you're taking, now you're doing it wrong, or you're not religious enough or spiritual enough? So this is where if you're in a high stress state, will this be helpful for you? And uh, man, I actually am. I'm gonna put it in A because if you're just praying that your pain would go away, I think there's a low chance that you're gonna end up hurt or in danger by that. But if you skew it into, if prayer doesn't happen, I am now bad or my approach to spirituality is wrong, that's where you're gonna get dangerous. It's similar to taking mental health day. Like you can use it wrong, you can overdo it. We're gonna put it here. Alcohol. My goodness. Okay, so I'm gonna make clear to everyone this is being debated between D and F, never useful or almost never useful. And I'm gonna put it really low D. I also want to disclaim I am someone who enjoys a drink, big fan of whiskey. I love doing tastings. Um, I'm not going to take a stance that this is evil, never do it. A couple things to know. It's an addictive drug. It can create addiction. It can create a very dangerous lifestyle for people. And you could make an argument, I think, for F. I know some people would put it higher. So usually what I think is going to be in people's mind when they're thinking about this is you can wind down with it. You had a stressful day and you're relaxing. Here's the phrasing I'm going to use. If your way of reducing stress in your life is dependent on chemicals and substances, it is not a long term, healthy, sustainable way to cope for two reasons. One, if it's anything that has tolerance, you will need more for the same effect to happen, like pornography, like alcohol, potentially eating, right? Potentially. Chemical dependence can become a thing. The second reason is if you need a substance and you've had a hard day, maybe you're traveling or you don't have any at home, now you feel dependent on needing this. So you might actually have a stress spike because you can't get access to the thing that reduces stress, or you panic because you're reliant on it. Now, this is long term use. I know I'm going back and forth on long term versus short term, but pretty much anything that is a um, addictive and mind altering substance, it's going to go low for me because going towards those things as a habit or as a way to reduce stress is not a long term utility. The reason it's in D right now is because I know the argument of people you're trying to get to a better place and you're struggling and you're working really hard. And the difference between a spiral and just a rough night is drink. So I'm not endorsing it, but I do empathize and understand with that. Where someone says, I'm just having a couple of drinks and I'm watching TV and it helps me relax. In the past, normally I would spiral this way. I get that. So I'm not condoning it and I'm empathizing, right? So while I don't think it is a long term helpful one, I do think um, that I can understand it from a cultural perspective. And that's a big part too. Here in the West, it's much more cultural versus some other drugs we might talk about. So, but generally, don't rely on substances for your mental health. All right, y'all. Discussing feelings online. It's not good all the time. Generally, not that helpful. I don't think it's never helpful. So I'm debating between C and D. I'm going to put it in high D. And um, I'll tell you why. And if you're watching this and you've done this, or know someone who has, you can give me your thoughts. But my experience typically is there's often a level of emotional immaturity that comes with putting your feelings online to get help with processing. And I'm going to put that into two categories. There's this I'm emotionally putting everything on the table. I don't know what to do with life. I'm so emotional. I'm just putting it online. And there's a difference between that and saying, I struggle with depression. Does anyone have any tips? That to me feels more like less of a coping thing and more of this is where I'm at in life. I'm looking for assistance. It's more logical brain. What have other people done? I have a huge category of people online that I can talk to versus I'm in a rough place emotionally. I'm having a horrible day and I'm going to go talk about it online. That's where this becomes unhealthy because you're putting it out to the world who has who knows what intent with their response or how they interpret it. They don't really know what's going on. They don't know your whole context. Also, especially when you think of teens and just younger folks, really primes them to be preyed on by people who would take advantage of it. And so I think it's a safety concern. And there can be understandable routes to discuss some feelings. And really, where this comes down to is probably the age slash maturity level of the person and the type of emotional depth they're pouring that out on. And bearing in mind that a lot of stuff that's put online is hard to pull back. And we really want to be putting stuff online when we're in a high emotional state. Okay. Revenge fantasies. Okay. So it's not going in B, let's be clear. This also has some subjectivity. What do we mean by revenge? So we're gonna put it this way: someone does cut you off in traffic, and you're just thinking the whole day how you could have, maybe I could have flipped him off, maybe I could have gotten in front of them and gone slow. And I'm gonna put this in low D category if I can. Goodness. Here's why. This is going through revenge in your head. Um, your brain just experiences it as that. So you're kind of teaching your brain that when we're stressed out about what someone did to us, it's okay in our mind to think evil, aggressive, mean, or problematic thoughts towards that person. So that's going to prime you to be potentially more aggressive, to assume the worst in people more often. If this is someone that you know and see on a regular basis, whether that's a neighbor or a boss or just um, someone that you're going to interact with more, you're more primed to assume the worst from them versus assuming that they maybe just made a mistake or that they just are struggling on their in their own life and they took it out on you, which is not okay, but it's different than malice. So you prime your mind to have really bad and unhealthy things with people, and we want to avoid that, aggressively avoid that. So while I understand there's some catharsis at times to thinking, oh, I could have done this, this is very rarely going to be useful, in my opinion. I think there's an argument that we can go with that. But I'm leaving some space for maybe people are just processing how they could have handled something. And, maybe that's a semantic issue with the word revenge. Okay. Cannabis. All right. Below alcohol, which I think is going to have a big set of opinions from other people. Okay. Why might I put it here? I said before, anything that's relying on substance for coping, it will be very clear this is not medically prescribed in this area. This is not healthily being used, right? Well, I guess that's actually an assumption. I just put it in the unhealthy category. So let me pull that back. It's not prescribed. That's a big one. We don't have a clear medical reason for it. And let me be also very clear on that. It's not a self-prescribed medical reason. That's not just you saying, well, I use it to reduce anxiety. I'm saying a doctor has prescribed it to you. You're using it medically. So we're just assuming this is recreational, just like alcohol. So now it's in the category of substance, and I don't want people getting reliant on substances to help cope with stressful days. And I know most people talk about how alcohol is overall more dangerous than cannabis. I think there are different dangers with each. Cannabis can create psychosis responses. It can also assist in activating schizophrenia. We hear a lot more of the chill stories with cannabis and less of the horror stories, which are real. We're pretty well educated on alcohol horror stories. Alcohol can do some crazy things too. So I'm not trying to say it's worse or better than alcohol on the whole. I actually think we are still getting the education process going with this. And in my opinion, this is currently more dangerous because of how we use it publicly. Totally fine with people pushing back on that. I can think of a couple friends right now who would be upset where I put this. So I stay away from that hard. I don't want to go near that at all. So overworking. Okay, is overworking ever useful as a coping method? Yes. Again, it depends. So now, the languaging is overworking, implying that whatever your standard is, it's more. So I'll actually put that C. So where this comes in is if you're stressing about money or you're stressing about something, like there's certain types of ways that you can cope with overworking. Now, if this is done habitually, I think it's very unsafe because you're going to burn out or you're going to just learn to shut emotions down and never feel. If this is a way for you to, like, let's say you're going through a breakup, something really difficult's going on, and you're just like, I'm just going to go into work. Um, if you're doing this in addition to still taking time to process emotions, I think it can be fun. If you're doing it to avoid emotions, it can be dangerous. So this sits to me kind of right. I am going to put it in B because it's generally not dangerous. It doesn't mess with your head the same way these two would, dark humor and venting. And it can be done healthily. Again, long term, not a good idea. But short term, it can be its own thing. So, especially if you're still finding time to process, but sometimes, especially when we're coping through high stress, sometimes you just need to calm down. And if you work a job that you can just kind of mindlessly do the thing, that can be helpful. So, again, like with a lot of these, overworking and taking a mental health day go hand in hand really well when it comes to telling people who you trust about what you're doing and allowing them to give some input on their thoughts for that being potentially safe or not. So, positive thinking. This one is interesting. I'm going to put it in A. It's not quite S tier. Really, the biggest downside that can potentially happen in my opinion, with positive thinking is ignoring real things that are bad. So the way that I like to think of my goal for my thoughts is to be an optimistic realist. I think positive as much as possible, but I don't want to delude myself into thinking a certain thing is not real. So if I'm grieving, for instance, I do want to think that I'm grieving because of the love that's existed with this person and the hope I had for the future. I wouldn't be grieving if I didn't have the relationship. The grief is a great thing. It's a beautiful thing. And if I tell myself, don't be sad, that's not respectful. So what to me, the healthy way of utilizing positive thinking as a coping method is to recognize what's true and then to do everything you can to find the positive and joyful parts of this experience without pretending the negative doesn't exist. We want to acknowledge that the hard parts are real. What positive thinking does is it tries to, in a healthy way, hijack every negative and awful thought that's trying to pull you down and say, no, 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 I don't want that. While still recognizing this loss is hard, this breakup is hard, this day was hard. And I'm grateful that I still have loved ones. I'm grateful that my bills are paid. I'm grateful that I can go to sleep on a bed tonight and not on the street. Right? It's a healthy gratification and comparison. So, all right, crying it out. I'm gonna put crying it out in high B category. This is personality based. Some people are very emotional. Some people are not. Generally, if you need to cry, it's healthy. Where it can be unhealthy is if you are emotionally dysregulated. And what I see here, sometimes people get into a survival mode and they start hyperventilating. And crying is a floodgates issue. So uh, this is this becomes really, really useful when you have trusted people who can know when to let you just feel it versus pull you out a little bit. Because sometimes when we get into a super emotional crying state, we're actually in a survival mode crisis versus just emotion. People who struggle to feel a lot of their emotions, crying it out would actually probably be much closer to S tier because they're finding a way to access that right now, and that's great. It's a beautiful moment. If you're hyper emotional, this becomes actually dysregulating. You can ask people, they say, "I don't wanna cry again." Like, it gets tiring. So, this one is in B because it's person dependent, but, it's not necessarily dangerous, generally speaking. Um, at the extremes, I guess you can technically dehydrate yourself and you can, uh, derail your whole day, hyperventilate and get yourself in trouble, but yeah. So that's gonna go there. Okay. Alright, this one cut off a little bit, but it says manifestation. Um, as a coping skill, probably put it in high C. Again, this is gonna get into if you have strong beliefs about manifestation or not. Um, I don't think about it that much. The way that I think of manifestation is this: if you're coming at it with this idea of like, I'm gonna cope with life by manifesting a positive life, I think that's a little bit dangerous because one of the this is hard. I do believe that if you think positively and you push forward and you believe certain things, I've talked about it on this channel before. I Mind over matter is a big, big deal. Um, you know what? I'm gonna put it in low B because I don't think it's necessarily dangerous. It's dangerous in the same way praying it away can be dangerous, where if you're just assuming that your manifestation practice has to work or you're a failure, then that's really bad. But generally speaking, you're not gonna harm the overworking. This one's gonna come down to how what your philosophy and your spirituality around manifestations. I don't use that language ever. I just believe in I'm a spiritual person. I believe in prayer, but I also believe in mind over matter. So, that I have actually a lot of choice in how I get to feel. And the manifestation piece, the closest it would get for me in my life is whatever you want in life, you can go get it. You need to aim there psychologically. You might not get it, but aiming in that direction is a higher chance to manifest said outcome. And again, all of this we're talking about as a coping tool, not as a general practice. That's different, right? Manifesting as a practice, positive thinking as a practice, um, discussing feelings online as a practice. These all change a little bit when we're coping or not. So please bear that in mind. Social media scrolling as a coping method. We're going to put low D tier. We're going to put it, gosh, this is actually hard. I'm tempted to put this as worse than substances. Hmm. Is social media scrolling worse than substance use as a coping method? I'm gonna say no, only because you're not gonna get. Actually, I'm gonna put revenge fantasy as healthier than alcohol. Okay. The social media scrolling, you're usually in your room, and it's not a healthy thing to do, but it is, at the very least, you're not gonna use it and then get behind the wheel and make a bad decision or go make stupid decisions because you're under the influence. Revenge fantasy is a psychological state. Social media just poisons your brain. It does it does matter what social media you're scrolling, but generally for coping, we're going for a certain type of emotional release, so it's probably dopamine spikes. You're probably not scrolling through education videos. You're probably looking at, um, sometimes inappropriate stuff that you shouldn't. Maybe it fits into this category down here, but oftentimes it's probably other people being happy, or you're trying to find a way to laugh, and you're just really kinda working that dopamine spike and getting into doom scrolling, and it's just as a way to cope. No, I mean, you can maybe do 10, 15 minutes as like, "Oh, I'm just interested in this right now," but coping, I don't think so. Getting on medication as a way to cope. I'm gonna put it on C. I would disclaim, I don't prescribe, not a pharmacologist. The reason I say for coping is because getting on medication as a way to manage life in a healthy way is different than coping. So, for instance, some people are very stressed to fly. So they'll go to the doctor and they'll try to get medication to minimize their anxiety. I don't think that's healthy usually. Is what is better is to go to therapy and figure out why you're getting stressed versus, again, medication can be a substance use issue. This is being on painkillers when you don't need to be. Anxiety medication when you don't need to be. ADHD medication when you're not really struggling with ADHD. You're just not managing your life well. Again, I don't know each individual person. Medications have very important usage in making people's lives livable and even bearable. And they can be really abused. That's why if we're framing this coping, right? Coping, not lifestyle. If you're coping with medication, I would say let's go to therapy. Let's talk with a professional about what the medication is doing that perhaps just working through some things could take care of. All right, trauma dumping. Pretty bad. Okay. Specifically in the wrong context. Actually, I'll move it up a little bit. Yeah. Um, with the right people, you should talk about your traumas and you should work through them. But you're having a rough day, so you're just unloading your trauma on people who don't need to hear it. That can actually be really unhealthy for you because if you open that deep well up and you don't have the training or the people around you to help seal that, you might actually be a little bit worse than you were when you started coping because you just emptied out your soul in this pain and suffering. And now you have to go home and you've laid it all out. And your heart's feeling it, your mind's feeling it. So this can be harmful to people we love, but I actually think the bigger risk is in the moment we think it's going to be helpful for us, but what's actually happening is that the Diet Coke and Mentos moment is exploding the trauma out because we're not addressing it, and we've just made a mess, and that can be really unhealthy. So this would be more of a long-term concern I have for people for how they're choosing to cope. And trauma should be worked through when we have it. There's healthy ways to do that. Just like making healthy decisions, sometimes we need to think about it for a bit before just impulsively doing something. And this can mess with our brain, and sometimes we'll get nightmares because we've thrown a bunch of unprocessed stuff out on the table and we don't know how to clean it up. Okay. Tough love. We're gonna go high C. I'm gonna say this is probably more of a men issue. So how I read this, being a guy, is we're having a rough go, and you give yourself the be a man, get over it, suck it up. Okay, that is how I interpret that. We put it low. This can stack over time and lead towards suicidality and self harm or aggression towards other people. There are definitely moments where I think it can be useful to say, dude, I do it to me. Like, you need to man up right now and do the thing, grow up. The problem is, I think when we do this in isolation, we become the arbiter of when that's the right choice. And I actually think it's better when we have other healthier men in our life who can tell us, hey, you do just need to kind of step up and take care of this. Versus, no, you need to slow down here. And part of being a man is feeling this out, working on this, or apologizing. And other times it's yeah, you need to suck it up and do it. And this is really hard to do when you're in the heat of the emotion with just yourself. So I know women can relate to this too, but as a guy, I kind of answered more through that lens. Video games as a way to cope. We're going to put into put it right there. There's not a lot of harm really, and it can even be helpful for creative tasks. And if you're playing online, it can be helpful. But if you're just ignoring your emotions by playing a video game, it's not that helpful. But it's similar to overworking, right? The difference here, um, well, Overworking at least can make your income as useful, but I think people often experience some stress doing this, where usually video games, they can be depressing though. These kind of are personality dependent. Video games are a great hobby if people wanna have them. If you're doing it to cope with the pain of the day though, there's definitely worse things you can do. Um, I think it's fair to go there. Setting hard boundaries, very healthy. However, when it's done through coping, you just wanna make sure you're not being impulsive. I'm having a bad day, therefore I'm texting my boss and saying, "You're never allowed to email me outside of work hours." It's like, that's impulsive. So really, actually, I think this is close to S tier, not high A tier in terms of mental health skill sets. But for coping, um, the caveat is if it's done through impulsivity in a high emotional state, there's a high chance that we set a boundary stronger than we needed to. Retail therapy, we're going to go see. Again, it's not that dangerous, but this is where you get into the issue of blowing your money and your resources. Um, and there are some real extremes. Like some people, they just go buy a shirt, or maybe they buy a video game, which doesn't get pricey. Or they go out to eat, and then we're maybe in a comfort food. They buy something, a book, but it often ends in depression, uh, or rather, that's a little too dramatic. We can feel down afterwards because it's not fulfilling, right? It's a quick dopamine spike, like social media scrolling or eating comfort food, but then we're back to feeling bad about ourselves, and now we're out the money. So, you know, I don't think it's going to damage your brain the same way. It's going to hurt your finances overall. Not that helpful, but not super dangerous. Again, dependent on like some people's retail therapy is they buy plane tickets to somewhere or they buy something super expensive, and that's you're getting into problematic territory. Self-diagnosis, our final F tier. Don't do this. Stop doing this. I'll tell you what, mental health professionals have a hard enough time figuring out diagnosis sometimes. So we're going to start with you're probably not accurate. Let's be clear again while coping. I actually think people looking stuff up online when you are the one experiencing it, you're probably getting pretty close sometimes because uh, you have a foot in the door, you have a stake in the game, so to speak. Like you are like, this is my health. I'm researching for me. I'm desperate. So I actually do think people often have a really good understanding of basic mental health when they are researching themselves. Usually where it falls short is they don't have a nuanced understanding, and mental health is a relatively new form of science. So there's actually a lot of overlap with diagnoses. So sometimes the subcategorization is there, and then people they'll read a book about ADHD and then like, I have ADHD, or they'll read a book about OCD and they're like, oh my gosh, it's me. And you're just kind of usually what people are doing is they're seeking a label so that they can then understand themselves and then have a route towards feeling better. Um, and so it can be a cop out to say, well, I'm diagnosed with this, therefore. So then if you use that diagnosis to say, well, I can't do anything about it, I have a diagnosis, that's not healthy. Or if you use it to say, well, now I have a route to go forward. That's healthy when it's true, but when it's the wrong diagnosis, now we start doing wrong interventions. So don't do this in isolation. An accurate diagnosis is a miracle, and that goes up here S tier. It's a real diagnosis. But when we're self-diagnosing from a state of high stress, emotionality as a way to cope, not very useful. Don't do it. So cool. I debated doing this one. This can be a super problematic topic. I also want to say if you're in a state where you're needing to cope, going to people you trust and going to a therapist can be important. So at the end of the day, if you're offended by any of these answers or you're in super agreement with any of them, it's kind of whatever. Really, what you want to do is be mindful that if you're needing to cope with life, then life isn't where you need it to be. And recruiting as much help and resources as you can to work towards getting yourself to a good place is a beautiful idea. There are therapists. Um, I'm licensed as a therapist in Kansas and Missouri, and then I also help people, often business owners, but just a lot of individuals outside of therapy with the consulting work I do and the coaching work I do, just with ironing out what they want out of it. And so I'm always, especially as you watch these, you can come my way, you can send people my way. Either I can work with them or I can get them connected with someone else. Or you can start looking locally where you're at or starting to increase conversations with friends and loved ones and trusted people to just maybe be open of like, I feel a certain way and I don't know how to cope with it. Or maybe you've been coping with one of these ways and never thought this is controversial. These are all controversial. People have strong opinions both directions on everything I just brought up. That's why I did them. So maybe you're taking one of them for granted and not realizing it's controversial. Um, and so, yeah, this is a conversation starter. So if you watch this far, feel free to give your thoughts. At this point, it's going to be a done live stream, but you can share what you have. So it is going to be that for today. That was a fun one, and it went way longer than I expected, but it was great. Now we're in, and yeah, enjoy and let me know your thoughts on coping skills or if there's any other controversial ones that I just completely left out and forgot about. See ya.